Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John. I help organize this group. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. Everything we do is free and donation-based. If you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest for the evening, Kristina Bare. So I did a retreat with Kristina and her main mentor and main teacher, Marcia Rose, last year. And I'm very glad I did that retreat because Kristina in particular gave a piece of advice that was completely transformative to my practice. It changed the direction of my practice. And I would say that piece of, I hope this doesn't feel weird for you to hear this, Kristina, or to be spoken about in the third person in this way while you're sitting right over there. But that one piece of advice that she gave during one of the sessions on this retreat is enough to, I'd say, make her one of like the 5 most influential people on my practice ever. So I think probably the Buddha's in there too, and a few other people, but Kristina's in there as well. So that's my personal story. But away from that, Kristina was introduced to Buddhist meditation very young by her father, who was a Zen teacher. Since 2009, she has found her home in the Vipassana tradition. She has done well over a year of silent retreat, including 6 months of continuous retreat in 2019 and 2020, after which she was invited into a 4-year Dharma teacher training process with Marcia Rose, as I mentioned, her main teacher. Kristina is still being mentored by Marcia as well as other teachers to teach retreats in the Vipassana tradition. So Kristina, let me bring you up here. I've been talking a lot about you. Maybe I should talk to you. Hi, Kristina, how are you?
Hi, John. Hi, good to see you.
It's very
I have
nice
to
to
say,
see
I
you
really
again.
appreciate your enthusiasm. Like you have so much passion for the Dhamma, and I mean, it's very uplifting to see how you speak about it and just to feel your energy. So
Thank you,
thank you.
Kristina. That's so
Yeah.
kind of you to say. I'm really glad that you're here. I wasn't sort of puffing or being hyperbolic. That
Mm.
you really, I mean, that's I think the first thing we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, really was transformative, that retreat. But before we go there, anything else that you want to just sort of say before we get started, you and I having our conversation?
I just want to say that I'm happy to join the group, and it's always a little bit sad to me that I probably won't get to hear everybody's voices. I prefer conversation much more than speaking into a group, so I get a sense of what everybody is sitting with, but we'll have a chance to do that later. And then I just want to say that whatever is shared is my own personal perspective on the Dhamma, right? And this is such a beautiful thing in the Buddha's teachings that he said, come and see for yourself, ehipassiko, right? So we're not actually invited to believe anything on blind faith. We are invited to sit down and explore our own minds with the tools from the Dhamma and then come to our own conclusion. So just to invite everybody to, if there's any sense that I need to believe all of this or I need to, take all of this in, just know that what's more important is your own personal practice. And a last thing, inviting all of you to listen from within your bodies. Sometimes when there's a big conversation going, we get so involved in trying to understand all the ideas that's exchanged, but just to maybe trust that another way of listening is to sit back and come into your bodies and listen from a more embodied place. So that's
Thanks,
just
Kristina. And
what's on my mind. Yeah.
no, it's great. And I think that when we're online, maybe because we're sitting in front of our computers where we're used to doing our sort of intellectual work or our intellectual play, I do find, at least for me, that naturally those conceptual circuits switch on quite heavily. And so I think it's so wonderful that we can do these things on Zoom and that this sort of virtual event is even a possibility. But I do think that it's wise, very wise, to point out the tendencies it's easy to fall into under any circumstances, but maybe especially when we're here in front of the things that we also sort of clickety clack on and do our work. So I appreciate that, Kristina. Thank you. So why don't we start, since it's just sort of my fun prerogative as the person who leads these interviews, why don't we start with that piece of advice that you gave to me, because I thought it was so powerful. Yeah, someone immediately just sent me a good. I'm glad I'm not being completely solipsistic. Someone sent a private message saying, "What did she teach you at that retreat that changed your views so much?" So, we talked about it, so we could. Does it make more sense for me to say it or for you to say it?
Why don't you share your version of it, and I can add to it.
Sure.
What happened for you?
Makes the most sense.
Yes, Kate.
Because I also remember you saying something that I later said back to you, and you said, "Well, I don't think I said that." So I may have, in my own mind, editorialized and added. So I'll include that too. So here's what I remember you saying, and I bet you'll be able to pick out the part that you maybe didn't actually say. But what I remember you saying was, so we'd finished doing concentration. We'd finished focusing on just sort of breath-based concentration practice, samatha, and we started moving into Vipassana. And you and Marcia were teaching Vipassana from a sort of Mahasi influenced, four foundations of mindfulness influenced perspective, but you were going one foundation at a time. So you were starting us off with just the body, and I remember what you said was, now open your awareness to the field of sensations in the body. I'm not quoting you, paraphrasing, and then you said something like this. You said, don't go out looking for body sensations. Don't try and see stuff. Instead, allow phenomena to present themselves. And maybe those are my words, but the analogy you used that I found so powerful was you said, imagine that you're trying to befriend a wild bird in the forest. You don't want to, and you can't snatch that bird out of the air. That will never work. All you can really do is put some birdseed in your hand and then hold out your hand. And then a bird might land in it, bird might not land in it. It's not up to you, and it's kind of none of your business, really, right? Your only job is to just hold the hand out. And that sort of went through me like a bolt of lightning, because I'd heard things like it before, but I hadn't realized until that moment the extent to which I was sort of squinting my mind to see more, to see faster, to see more clearly, to see something else, something better. And this idea of, no, just you're trying to snatch the bird out of the air. That's never going to work. Just hold out your hand. That was very powerful. And I've ruined it. I didn't want to play a game. So I'll just tell you the thing that I remember you saying that you then later disclaimed. I remembered you saying, don't investigate. And that's a tricky thing, right? Because investigation of Dhammas is one of the enlightenment factors. But my memory, at least, of you saying that, perhaps wrong, perhaps false memory, was still really helpful, because I associated investigation with something very active, assertive, penetrative. And so that was what I remember. Am I remembering more or less? Would you say that I have it more or less right, what you were trying to convey, maybe minus the part about investigation?
I think so. I was curious about whether it was a teaching to the whole group, but it sounded like it was in an individual practice meeting that I offer that image.
It was no. It was to the whole group, but it was in a practice meeting where I said, I think I was just gushing to you about how incredibly helpful it had been. I said, you said this, you
Yeah.
said this, and you said don't investigate. And I think you were like, oh, up, up, up. Did I say that? Yeah.
Yeah, I probably could have been I used those words, but really was what I was inviting was a little bit less of that sort of assertive, what's happening here, I need to see the next moment, I need to understand what's happening here, and come into a much more receptive type of knowing phenomena from moment to moment, right? And sometimes we actually interfere with the flow of knowing when there's a lot of that sort of pointing of the mind and looking for things and exploring things, and so it can be really helpful for especially particular some of us. We need that type of instruction for us to learn how to have more of a receptive way of knowing phenomena at any of the six sense doors. So yeah, and it's a beautiful image. It's meant a lot to me, and like you, I had heard the same type of instructions from many different teachers, but somehow that particular image was really stuck with me, and I still use it and I think it's because it speaks about coming into a more helpful type of effort, wise effort, but it also has patience in it, right? You need to be, if you imagine yourself going into a forest clearing and building a relationship with a wild bird, like you need to really put in your time, right? And in some ways you have to not be invested in that bird landing on your hand and building that relationship. You have to just be in it, just to be there, just like an offering. I'm here, I've got these seeds, but I'm not invested in this bird coming, right? And if we grab for the bird lands. Sometimes we that's what we do in our practice. Like we grab for the next experience, we grab for the next moment, we grab for the next understanding. And then of course that bird is not going to come back anytime soon. It's going to fly off, and we may not build that trusting, patient relationship with the bird. So
yeah. And this, by the way, is not to say that there's no development or cultivation in at least this style of meditation practice, right? It's you don't want your hand to be wiggling all over the place. You don't want your hand to get tired and fall down, right? You do need to do the act of holding out the hand, but that's sort of your only job. And we put much more on ourselves. We think our job is much more than that. We think our job is to go out and bag some sensations, right? Go and bag some phenomena.
Yeah, and I mean it's think about it as intimacy as well, right? Mindfulness as a type of getting really close to our experience, right? So if you just again imagine this hand, how intimate that experience is when the hand is open and it can truly receive the tiny little experiences of that little bird coming and nibbling and flying away. And that intimacy is what builds this more sustainable type of investigation, right? That is like a true curiosity, like where there's this deep sort of what is happening here? What is going on here? I want to get to know this even more, right? And that brings even more intimacy with the phenomena that we are paying attention to. And then energy comes, and the other awakening factor starts to develop from this base of deep, intimate, respectful, patient, gentle connection with the object.
Yeah. And that gentleness, I think for folks who might be hearing this either in the audience or watching the video, who are acquainted with Vipassana practice, in particular, I would say the Burmese traditions, and maybe in particular, the Mahasi, the tradition influenced by the teachings of Mahasi Sayadaw, which, by the way, I'm not here to denigrate. That is my main practice right now. I bow deeply to that practice. It's very, very powerful and beautiful. But I think that for people who are acquainted with that practice, many of them might be surprised to hear you speak about gentleness in this way. I think it has acquired a perhaps undeserved reputation for being a very intense, muscular, exertive practice. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that. I have my thoughts on how that might have come about, but I wonder, do you have thoughts on why is that? Where did that come from? And yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
A couple of thoughts. First of all, it's hard to know. I haven't sat with Mahasi Sayadaw. I haven't sat with U Pandita, so it's hard to know what type of individual advice they might give you. And it's possible that if there is a lot of tightness in the mind, that you might get that advice to ease off a little bit and have a more receptive approach. I think in general, when we start the practice, we need a fair amount of effort. We need some of that striving energy, right, to get ourselves to the cushion, to make that contact with the object, to have the clarity of perception, what's actually happening here, to increase mindfulness. So we need a little bit of that sort of, we could call a yang, or I don't know what to call it, but that energy that's a little bit more assertive. But then if we continue there, it does tend to, my experience is it does tend to, again, create that tightness in the mind. So again, there's a time and place for different types of effort. And the Buddha used the image of sometimes we talk about it as a lute. In the sutta, it's actually not a lute. I can't remember what the instrument it is, but it's a string instrument, right? And he gave the instructions that at a certain time, either you need to tighten the strings or you need to loosen the strings. So it all depends. Even in our moment-to-moment practice, we're constantly fine-tuning how much effort do I put in here and how much do I ease back and receive.
Yeah, and I think that sort of tuning, that loosening, that shift toward receptivity was just exactly what I needed in that moment, phrased, I think, in just the way that I needed to hear it. But I could also see in other circumstances where someone is perhaps overcome with a bit too much dullness and things have gotten a bit lax, that the effort would be more around, it still might not be trying to snatch the bird out of the air, but there might be, a bit more instruction given towards brightening the mind and clarity and making a right and balanced effort. But I'm not a Dharma teacher myself, so I'm speculating. But one thing that occurs to me, and you sort of already touched on this, but I think it's a nice segue, is that if you're practicing in a way that is sort of gripping, grasping, reaching, it's hard to imagine that mind also allowing sort of relinquishment to blossom, right? You and I talked about this, and I want to talk about this with you now, that even though Vipassana practice, that means sort of insight or clear seeing, and the sort of mechanism of Vipassana practice is clear seeing, the important result, as I understand it, and I believe as you teach it, is a letting go. It's all ultimately in service of a letting go. And so it's hard to imagine you snatching at phenomenon, sensation. That doesn't seem like an attitude that's particularly aligned with letting go. So could you talk a little bit about that relationship between Vipassana practice and letting go or relinquishment or abandonment? Some might say, I don't know if you would include renunciation in that bucket. Yeah, could you talk about that? Could we talk about that a bit?
Sure. Yeah, so we don't actually get anything from this practice, right? That's the paradox. Well, we get the freedom of letting go, right? So there's a freedom of letting go that deepens and develops through this practice. But in how we often think about attainment or getting somewhere or getting an understanding, that understanding actually just leads to deeper and deeper release process, a deeper and deeper letting go process, right? But often we have to purify in many different ways through the whole practice, through the three trainings, sila, samadhi, and panya. Sila, concentration, and wisdom. We have to sort of work through a purification process where we, in more and more subtle ways, see how the mind keeps solidifying, grasping, wanting, becoming, and that's going to show up in the way we practice as well. So in some ways, we can say, sit and practice like, you're in a forest clearing and your hand is out just receiving the bird, right? But what's probably going to happen for most of us is that the next time we sit down, the mind again is going to, maybe cling to that image. And in some ways we cannot bypass our own seeing the dukkha, seeing the suffering in that way of practicing. And it's for us seeing that for ourselves, that there's a letting go. At some point, it's like, this is just too painful. The depth of seeing that is so clear that the mind finds another way of practicing. And it's not our fault, right? Because this is how we've been trained. This is how we get somewhere in the world, is by this mind that's grasping for things. And so we've got tons of training doing that. So we have to hold all of that with compassion when we see that patterning of the mind and how deep that is and how it shows up again and again and again in a retreat. And so we can just have it as an intention, as an invitation, say, hey, mind, this seems like it's causing some suffering, some pain, some tightness in the mind and the body. Could you practice renouncing that, releasing that? But then again, we'll see this. So I don't know if that was true for you, John, but it's like we have to sort of see the pain in our own mind for us to get to a point where we start practicing in a different way that's more sustainable.
Yeah. And your point about having to see the pain, that really struck me, because one thing that I find, one opinion that I hear a lot is, once you start talking about things like, letting go, people like not grasping, that sounds uncontroversially good. But then when people start using words like renunciation, or when people start talking about, no conditioned things in this world are going to bring you lasting satisfaction, or maybe even any satisfaction, people start saying, well, wait a minute, this sounds like a life denying. So this is, I want to make like sort of I want to make the sort of devil's case against, I guess, Theravada Buddhism. And so this, I hear this, and even sometimes people who practice in other ways will say, my practice is a practice of joy. It's a practice of embracing life. It's a practice of embracing my emotions. I don't want to reject my emotions, even my cravings. I don't want to be detached, and I don't want to renounce. That's or they might even say that's a lesser practice for people of lesser capacity, for people who aren't able to fully be with things or see the intrinsic wholeness in all things. They renounce. It's a renunciatory, a lesser path. So there's the sort of hodgepodge of objections to the sort of idea of relinquishment. What would you say to that stuff?
I wonder if it has to be a polarity. In my own experience, the more letting go there is, the more fullness there is. The more there is a deep appreciation of again, the beauty, the preciousness of each moment. So it doesn't feel, and the love, like there's more love in the heart that can flow through. There's more connection. It's just that the mind knows that it's not permanent, that it cannot be solidified, and there's not going to be a lasting happiness that I can grab onto or make mine or keep forever. So there's a greater alignment with the truth of impermanence. but that actually brings a lot more fullness of the heart and a lot more connection and a lot more intimacy and a lot more joy. It's just that the mind is not expecting, sometimes it's like, oh, there's a moment of joy, and then it's like, oh, this is how it should always be. Like, this is the right moment, and all the other moments of experience are somehow not the right moments, but this moment is the perfect moment. And it's just that the mind knows that there's going to be a variety of many moments, and the less we resist or cling to any of that, it's actually the paradox. The more moments of fullness, the more moments of preciousness, the more moments of joy can show up. So it doesn't feel life denying to me, or it doesn't feel it has heart in it. This practice, my experience is that it has heart. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, well, I'm convinced. Yeah. Not hard to convince me, but I think that that's convincing even to the sort of skeptic that I'm portraying. Right. No, I mean, I share your experience that my life has not gotten drier as a result of the practice. I've not become some sort of dial tone flat version of myself. If anything, I continue to have too much personality. But yeah, it is not, that hasn't been my experience at all. So no, I think you put it very beautifully. Thank you. Thanks for sort of indulging me that, sort of hypothetical.
I just want to return back to can I say something else about the renunciation?
Please.
Yeah. Just again, that, all of us here are practicing renunciation right now, right? Because we're here in this moment, we made this choice to come here. So we renounced all kinds of other things we could have done tonight, right? And this practice won't deepen unless we renounce all the ways that we can find joys in the world, and take some time to explore this practice. So that's just one type of renunciation, one type of letting go. It's because there's an intuition that that we're all wishing for something that's a little bit less dependent on all the joys that we normally find in the world. TV and phones and parties and yeah.
But at the same time, I think people fear it a little bit. Like, for instance, I've heard things, over the years I've been practicing, I've heard things and I've said things like, well, I don't want to not like ice cream anymore. Will I not want to have ice cream? Will I not love jazz the same way? And I think an honest answer, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think an honest answer would be, it can't matter to you in the same way as this practice deepens, because what changes is you won't feel dependent on those things. You won't be clutching at those things as a perceived source of satisfaction in this world, or a source of salvation or something. So I imagine something has to change, because you're no longer looking to that as, oh, that's the thing that makes me okay. Without it, I wouldn't be okay. And that is a change. But do you still can you be an awakened jazz aficionado? Can you be an awakened, Cherry Garcia ice cream lover? Are those things compatible, or do people sort of have it right when they intuit, now I'm going to lose something there. Maybe I'll gain something of immeasurably greater worth, right? Like, Tanasaru Bhikkhu likes to say trading candy for gold, but that implies that you are trading something away. And so is that right? Do we have to sort of acknowledge, yeah, you are actually going to lose a little something that you currently enjoy? Or is that not even true?
My intuition is that it won't be felt like a loss. So again, talking about it like I'm going to lose this, there's a subjective experience of this is a loss. Again, it's more like this giving up, I'm giving it up, but I think it's more of a falling away process, that as the mind finds other types of joy, other types of satisfaction, that some of the ways that we usually look for joys are just not going to be appealing, just because the mind has access to other types of joy. But the Buddha, you know, in the teachings about, it's the Dart Sutta, I think, where he talks about how I think he's referring to fully enlightened beings, and they still experience pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling to them. But their relationship with, for example, the pleasant sensation of ice cream in your mouth is different than someone that immediately, okay, now I want this ice cream to go on forever. I want to have another ice cream. I want to become have my own ice cream machine at home, or whatever the mind sort of grasps for that. And that's what's changed, is the shift in relationship with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral.
It almost sounds like a growing up of sorts, right? There's like, I don't know if it's from the Bible. I was born Jewish, so I'm not that familiar with the Christian Bible, but I think there was something, maybe it's not from the Bible, I have no idea where it's from, but it was something like, when I became a man, sorry, it's the language is gendered, but it's like, when I became a man and I put away childish things, or something like that. And there's this idea of like, here's maybe a bad analogy, but tell me if I'm sort of getting it a little bit. If I were to go to Six Flags, which is an amusement park near me in New York City, you know, with rides and such. When I was a kid, I loved the bumper cars. They were fun. I would never go on the bumper cars now. I've been on a roller coaster. They rule. They're a million times better than the bumper cars. That doesn't mean that the bumper cars wouldn't be fun, or I would go on them and suddenly all the joy would be leached from. It's just, why would I do that? Right? Like, so is there something there where it's not that the pleasures of, I know it's not one-to-one, but this idea of, it's not like the pleasure is leached out of these things. It's there, the same pleasure is there as it was before. It's just that your perspective has changed and you've been opened to much deeper and richer vistas. Obviously, the gap is bigger than the gap, and less trivial than the gap between bumper cars and a roller coaster. But is that sort of the idea? Like, it's still nice to have a an ice cream sundae. It's just, you've experienced something else now that kind of, how could an ice cream sundae compare?
Well, one thing we get to see in our practice is that the pleasantness is not in the object. The pleasantness is in the mind, right? So when there's a shift of perception and relationship with certain objects, they may not appear pleasant to us anymore, right? So that ice cream, we've probably all grown out of things that we loved at one point, and then at some point, maybe we ate it too much, and all of a sudden it's neutral, right? It doesn't give you the same kind of pleasure. So that's a good sense of it, in a very ordinary way, how we've grown disenchanted with that particular type of food. Just by eating it again and again and again, it no longer gives that pleasant hit. Now it's a more neutral experience, and so we don't really go for it, right? And so again, it's really not a moralistic top-down, these things are bad for you. It's the mind shifting its relationship with phenomena, and getting disenchanted with the types of pleasures it usually would get from some of these phenomena. Yeah. But again, I would say that it doesn't, so this may sound really boring, or, is there no fun? This is a path of increasing well-being, right? So it really, it's a worthwhile path that although there's a natural fading away of certain ways that we usually go out and look for pleasures, the deepening peace and well-being that comes is so much more worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely agree. I do think it is scary to people, to some people, including to me sometimes, the idea of changing so much, of having your, like, like when you're a kid, you're like, I'll never stop loving, I will never stop loving the bumper cars, right? Like, that's important. It's almost important to me as part of my identity that I'm someone who loves the bumper cars. I will never, there is like a sort of fear that I notice in myself sometimes and that I hear in other people of this letting go that leads ultimately to such a beautiful place, but a very different place, and it's just a tricky thing to, I don't know, it's a tricky thing to wrap one's head around, the idea that, oh, the things that you think of as bringing you joy right now, there's a future version of you who will look at those things and say sort of, that, there's like sort of a threshold to cross of sorts, psychologically.
But the great thing is that you don't actually have to do anything other than moment to moment doing your practice, and the practice will do this for you. It's a result, it's a natural fruit of that intimate knowing phenomena from moment to moment to moment.
Yes.
And so the fear is a concept, right? It's building an idea about what's going to happen and how scary it's going to be, but the actual experience is just staying very current with each moment and bringing again that intimate, relaxed, patient knowing of experience, and then the practice will unfold on its own. And yeah, and it will unfold in a way that is very gentle for everybody. So that's speaking again about right effort, right? Sometimes if we do too much, if we strive too much, if we sort of, I'm gonna really sit down and I won't move from this cushion and I'm gonna just do my practice, that type of striving sometimes, there can be openings and they can be a little bit jarring. But if we practice in a kind way, in a titrated way, in a relaxed way, but consistent way, then the way it progresses is gentle and just the right pacing for each person. Does that make sense? So I'm just, again, it is a leap of faith, but it will make a lot of sense, I think, as we do it. And of course, just to say, I have very long to go on this path, right? So I'm just speaking from my vantage point. This is just intuitions that I'm sensing at this point in the practice, that it's very trustworthy, and it really does lead to a piece that is really worthwhile practicing for.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing from the vantage that you're at now. I hope you'll come back and join us again from a slightly different vantage in the future and share some more with us.
We'll always be at a different vantage point. Each moment,
that's right.
New perspective. Yes.
Yes. Well, I hope you'll join us again, especially since there were so many other things I wanted to ask you about that we're not going to have time to, because I want to switch to the Q&A now. I wanted to talk to you about the Dhamma and contemplative practice and parenthood, since you are a parent. I wanted to talk to you about the, and I'm sorry if you prepared for these things, because I know we talked about them and then we didn't get to them.
Okay.
But this conversation just ended up so rich that I wanted to just let it flow. We were going to talk about the relationships, differences, overlaps, juxtaposition of Mahasi practice and Pa'ak practice. These are all things that people can ask questions about if they want to, by the way. I'm just sort of throwing it out there. But Kristina, are you all right with us moving to Q&A now?
Sure. Sounds
all right.
good.
Fantastic. Eileen, would you like to ask Kristina your question?
Sure. Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, I was wondering about your 6-month retreat experience. Just curious, like, was there a difference between sitting 3 months versus 6 months? And, like, that's a long time to sit. Did you grow? How would you say that you grew through that practice? And would you recommend it? Because also I know you recommend continuity in daily life is just as valuable. So how it's one of 6 of one and one of another. That's what I wanted to know.
Thank you,
Could you
Eileen.
talk about your experience?
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, so that's actually a great question, because I wanted to clarify that it was 2-3 months periods with a short period in between. And the reason why I didn't end up being continuous 6 months was that it was during the time when I was practicing at the Forest Refuge, and one day the teacher came in and said, we're closing down because of COVID. And so I had to come out of retreat, and then I found a cabin and went back into retreat. So there was a little, there was a break in that retreat period. Yeah, and the timing was just really right for that type of really deep practice. So I had been with my grandmother, who outlived my mother through her death and dying process, and so it was a very beautiful experience to just support her through all those months leading up to the moment of death. And so the heart just felt really called to take that experience and make it supportive for a long practice period. So I don't want to say this is right for everybody. It was right for me at that particular time, and it was very beneficial. But the heart and the mind and the body was really ready to sit a long retreat. And so I don't think that's always what is needed. But for me, it was a very, very useful experience. And then to really, over time, get to see your mind in a very deep way over a long, long period of time was very helpful. So hopefully this was useful for you. So I think it's very individual what is needed for each person at different times in their lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Kristina. Sado, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes. Hi, Kristina.
Hi.
My name is Eduardo, actually, and I'm calling you from Santiago, Chile.
Oh, nice to meet you.
This is my first exposure to Theravada. I usually practice Zen. And I noticed that you're constantly speaking about an I and a non-I. For example, when you had the bird, there was an I and there was the bird. So it's constantly, I want to change. I want this. I don't get attached. So there's always an I and a non-I. It seems that what I'm saying is correct. You don't eliminate the dualism in Theravada meditation. Is that right?
It's probably a different way in, right? So when you say that, I talk about, I think about seeing anatta, the not self nature. But that's a process. There's a way that we're working with seeing objects over time that will then lead to a deep insight into anatta, into the not self nature of all phenomena. So we are working within our personality, right? So there is a what can you say? It's although ultimately there is no self, but on another level, there is a felt sense of a self. There is an experience of a self. So I don't know if this is helpful for you, but
in Zen we say there's just this.
Mm-hmm.
Just this. No eye, no pen, just this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
And I imagine that can be very, very powerful way in Theravada. We see objects with more and more clarity.
okay.
And through that, there's a deeper and deeper understanding into the three characteristics, and that's what leads to that letting go of the sense of separation, if that makes
Thank
sense.
you.
But I think the pathway in is a little bit different.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Very interesting conversation. Thank you both. Thanks, Eduardo. Thank you, Kristina.
Welcome.
So let's see. Mary, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you so much. You've really filled in a lot of holes in my language.
Mm.
I really appreciate that. One piece of language that I use that you don't use is that instead of saying seeing, I say experiencing.
Mm.
And I don't need you to answer that because it just works better for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
the practice that I'm familiar with a lot of practices, including Vipassana, but the practice I'm most familiar with, the attainment is awakening or enlightenment through 5 insights, including no self. And I was just wondering, and I hope this doesn't seem like a really egotistical question because it's not. Okay, I got no ego left. I'm just fumbling along from day to day. Continuity of practice is, in your experience or in your tradition, is awakening or enlightenment a moment-to-moment experience as opposed to like, this ultimate thing, like you attain it, you attain the 5 insights and then you're awakened or enlightened. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I just want to validate the language around the experiencing. I think that's really beautiful. And again, when I use that image of the bird and the hand, right? That's again, it speaks to that intimacy with experience, right? Which feels much more like an experiencing than a seeing. But often we do talk in the Theravada tradition. We talk about clear seeing. So that's part of why I've used this language. But maybe the actual experience of it is more of an experiencing. So just to say that. So really good question. And again, I can only speak from my vantage point and maybe from the Theravada tradition. Within the Theravada tradition, there is this idea of these stages of awakening. There's talk about 4 progressive stages of awakening where there's a deeper and deeper understanding and a deeper and deeper letting go process of the patterns of the mind that are keeping us in suffering. And yet, even though there is this, you can say, progressive path, there can be many, many moments of freedom in the here and now. So, for example, when I talked about the feeling tone, the Buddha's teachings about the difference between noticing pleasant and grasping for pleasant, that's a moment of here and now freedom. When the mind can rest, oh, this is just pleasant, and feel the unfolding of a pleasant feeling tone, for example, with the sight of a beautiful environment. There's the arising of a pleasant feeling tone in that moment, but the mind is not right away trying to own it, solidify it, have more of it. So that's a moment of freedom in the here and now. And the more we deepen this practice, the more moments of that sort of letting go is happening in daily life. So hopefully this is helpful.
I just wanted to say thank you. That's
Thank
my
you.
experience as well. Moments of insight in daily life.
Thank you
so much.
Welcome.
Validation. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you, Kristina. Idris, do you want to ask your question?
Would love to. Thanks, John. Hi, Christina. Really loved how you introduced it with the listening with the body too. You know, with the releasing and the letting go. You know, I guess I just want to, you know, once I've come to the point that I'm okay with this and this is like, I guess something I want to try. How do I do like navigate this when I guess my nervous system says like no, you know? When I'm like, when I want to like let go and try something, but the body just frozen or runs away, or there's like internal conflict, like physiologically.
Are you talking
Any
about
advice with that?
actual,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for sharing. Are you talking about an actual sitting in meditation, or just so I get a sense of sort of what this looks like when your nervous system is agitated and it's hard to?
Um, I guess it would be say like it would be like, you know, like a real world situation, like actually trying to deal with animals or trying to talk to someone or trying to, you know, exert myself physically, but then like being stopped, and then I'm reflecting on it in the sitting, because it's like, all right, there's a blockage there, and I kind of want to resolve why, like what part of me is so afraid of like you know, the thing that stopped me from acting.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a wish to understand why there was some kind of reactivity in the mind at some point in your life, and that's coming up for you in your practice.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say that I think there is a time and place to do that type of work. You know, so I'm also trained as a somatic experiencing therapist, as a psychologist, and sometimes when there is trauma layers showing up in our sitting practice, like in the form of we have a memory of something happened, and then there's maybe tightness in the body, fear showing up. If that's an ongoing thing, sometimes it's really helpful to do some other type of work besides the meditation, because when there's a lot of activation in the nervous system during a sitting, it's actually really hard to stay mindful. You probably noticed this, right? Because the mind is in sort of a fear place. And so for mindfulness to have really good conditions, often when there's a little bit more regulation on board, it can be more easy for us to have sort of just a clear, open knowing, okay, this is just the mind making stories, these are just sensations in the body, these are just emotions that are showing in this moment. That can be really difficult when there's a lot of activation in the system. So sometimes that can be helpful as a support for the meditation practice. Yeah, and then you know, the mind. So let's say there's a memory that comes up and there's a tightening in the chest or the throat. That's what I often hear from people. And then the attention gets sort of sucked into those sensations, right?
Yeah.
And then that actually increases those sensations, because now we're with them with some fear, some aversion, some disliking of those sensations. So we're not actually able to just let them move through. It can be helpful to sometimes to open the eyes, or to bring attention to the feet, or to expand the awareness a little bit, so we don't get so bogged down on particular sensations in the body. So hoping this is helpful. Yeah.
Very. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Idris. Dev, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Christina. How are you?
Good.
So my question for you was, how old is your baby or child while you were on retreat? Because I'm a new mom, so I'm navigating through practice, and I would love to go on retreat and just not sure how to handle all of that. So I'm just curious.
That makes a lot of sense. So so my son is almost 31 now. So he was actually early teens when I started going on retreat. So he was pretty self-sufficient, but I can just really relate to the challenge of really wishing for a retreat, but also, you know, I'm sure you know, you're also having challenges, you know, thinking about leaving your baby. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, she's only 8 months old, so
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tough one. And can taking care of her, can that be your practice then? Right. So instead of thinking the practice is somewhere else, because in some ways the retreats and all the techniques that we're teaching are just skillful means. They're just helpful tools for us to have the supports to deepen the practice, but we can actually practice anywhere at any time. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the teacher Diba Ma.
I have.
Yes, right. So she was a mom, and she couldn't just go on long retreats, but she really practiced at home, you know, with being a parent and being in her home, and made that her practice, you know. So just to not get torn up inside, and maybe think about, you know, what is a way that you could practice in your daily life, and then when the heart knows when it's time for you to go and retreat, to trust that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Dev. Kelly, do you want to ask your question?
So thank you, Kristina, again for everything you shared. And just kind of relating to that last point, can you speak more about from the cushion, taking the practice on the cushion into daily life, and what that looks like in practice, and how you can help yourself from forgetting it until about 3/4 into the day?
Yeah, good points. For me, I really developed some different reminders for myself through the day when I practice in daily life. So, you know, for many years I was working in an agency as a therapist, and there would be a lot of times when I would go from my seat and to the bathroom, or go from my seat to the tea station, and I just made it a habit that you know, that walking, I wouldn't be thinking about what I was going to do next, or planning for the next thing, but I would make that a walking period. And that little, because it was so many times through the day, it really anchored the mindfulness, and it meant that there could be a lot more moments of mindfulness throughout other parts of my day, because I was really it was a great way to practice. And then when I drove back and forth to work, I would practice feeling the sensations of the steering wheel, not excluding everything else. I was mindful of the road as well, but that would sort of be like, we take the breath as our anchor. The sensations of my hand on the steering wheel would be my anchor, and I wouldn't turn on a radio or do other things, but make it sort of part of my daily practice. And then of course there's practicing in relationships. Right? So my practice with that, and it continues to be, is embodiment. Because I often find that it's in my close relationships, right, that I really lose the mindfulness. And then I get to say things that I regret, or, you know, I'm not really present with myself and the other being. And so I practice really being in my body, because that's always a direct access to the here and now. So if I can keep coming back to, okay, how's the body feeling in this moment? Okay, I can feel my sit bones, I can feel my belly breathing. There's a much greater likelihood that there'll be more mindfulness in that conversation, and there'll be a wiser version of Kristina showing up in those moments. You know, someone who's a little bit more attuned and a little bit more able to take in what the other person is saying. So those are just ways that I practiced.
Those are fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Kristina. Okay, second questions. Mary, please go ahead if you like.
This is just a really quick question about vocabulary. First of all, I was really fascinated that in your tradition, if something is pleasant, it's okay to open to it. Because in the way I was taught, it's a combination of Theravada and Mahasi noting. We were taught to use the word equanimous and to watch for Vedana or Vedana. And when there was Vedana or Vedana present, to note it. But in my practice, I actually try to steer myself away from the Vedana or Vedana back to neutral. So it's kind of a vocabulary question, but it's also a practice question. But I want to make sure there's enough time for everyone else. So
that's a great observation. And yeah, so there's so much understanding that could come out of, it's actually been my primary practice for a long time, has been this resting with feeling tone, right? Resting with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral arising, because there's always a feeling tone in any moment at any of the 6 sense doors. And to see that there's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end to these feeling tones. They arise and they pass away, right? So again, with the example of for a long time, I live in a beautiful city, and every day I walk by the ocean here and I see little seals popping their heads up, and I can see that there's pleasant arising at the eye door, and then I can feel my eyes going out to now look for the next seal, right? So the mind is grasping for those sights of those seals because there's, again, this pleasantness. But then to be able to see, I'm actually missing that moment, because now the mind is no longer just with that experience of a wave of pleasant. Now it is on to trying to get to the next pleasant moment. So that can be a really deep practice to practice opening to it, and then notice the impulse to want to have it, right? So those are 2 different mental phenomena: the Vedana and the craving, for example, for pleasant. So they feel like they're totally tied together, but they are actually 2 different phenomena. The craving for pleasant is a reactivity to the pleasant. And so it's easier said than done, but it's a place we can practice and where we can find that momentary freedom. Because it's also the reactivity to feeling tones that takes us into what the Buddha called papancha, or proliferation of mind. So when there's reactivity, craving for pleasant experiences, being averse to unpleasant experiences, or tuning out with neutral, the mind often starts to proliferate and think about, what we want, where we're going, what's happening here. The mind just starts a lot of that proliferation. So hoping this is helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Kristina, and thank you, Mary. Candice, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Candice.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much for this, and John for setting this up. My question is similar to the one that you just answered. When you're sitting and you keep letting go, what am I letting go to? Like every time I like to think, oh, that's tightness in my leg, and then kind of bring it back, but then I may think, oh, that's a thought about something. And so there's there's constantly a lot of information happening. So what am I actually letting go of? Or like there just seems to be a lot of information all the time. And so I don't know, then I think, is that clinging, or I'm trying to label it? Is that a question?
I think so. Thank you for, and just to clarify, we are not actually actively letting go. The letting go happens out of the Buddha talked about a disenchantment process. So for example, with with needing something specific to happen in our practice, at some point we start noticing the pain of that. We start noticing this is painful, the way that my mind keeps wanting to be more concentrated, keeps wanting to be more mindful, keeps wanting to, to see things more clearly. We start to see that trying to get somewhere is painful, and that it's like a child putting their hand on the hot stove. At some point it's like we see, okay, this really hurts. We may do it 100 times, but at some point it's like, okay, it really does hurt to put your hand on the stove. And then there's a letting go that happens. So the letting go happens on its own. You don't have to do it. What I'm hearing in your the way you describe the practice sounds right on track, right? So what we notice when we sit down, and we may have this intention of, let me stay with my breath for the next 10 minutes, right? And then we notice that the mind keeps being pulled off in a million different directions, right? So even with this strong intention, I'm going to sit, I'm just going to be noticing my breath, the mind still does all kinds of things. And that's part of what we get to see through our practice, the uncontrollable nature of mind, that we actually don't have a ton of control over this mind. It does what it does based on previous conditioning, all the ways that we previously had talked about training the mind, the way that we, it's a form of training, the way that we use our phones and we go online and, we constantly shift our attention. That's a really deep training. And so when we sit down to practice, that conditioning of the mind is what's going to show up. And our job is not really to do much about it, but to see it, to witness it, to notice it. And that's what you're doing, right? You're saying, wow, look at this. A thought comes up, a body sensations, a memory comes up, boredom comes up, and your job is just to become increasingly aware of all these patterns of your mind. And the reason why we often start with the breath is, again, it can be, sometimes that can get really disorienting with the mind and the way it sort of, the attention keeps moving from object to object. So we need that stability of having the same object, right? So returning back to the breath. It's not to get rid of anything, but it's a way that we can support a stabilization of the mind, so that the mind, when the mind then gets pulled off, there's a little bit more stability to be able to see the mind in motion. Yeah. Hopefully that helps to clarify. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candace. Thanks, Kristina. So I think we are close enough to the ending time, and the only questions left are second ones. So I think it'd be better if we just wrapped rather than keeping you late. So Kristina, thank you so much for coming, answering these questions, having that conversation with me. It's been just such a pleasure to reconnect with you. And I hope everyone else found this as valuable as I did. I do want to apologize to anyone whose questions we didn't reach. Everyone who had a first question did get to ask one though, so I feel good about that. Oh, another thing, Kristina, you and I talked about this, but I forgot to mention it. You take one-on-one students, correct? Virtually, as
Yes.
well as psychotherapy clients. So I also neglected to mention, my apologies, Kristina, that Kristina is also trained as a psychotherapist. So she takes both psychotherapy clients, and you take one-on-one meditation students or Dharma students, correct?
I actually can only take psychotherapy clients in Denmark, where I'm licensed, and in Canada. So I can't see anyone with my hat on as a psychotherapist in the States, but I can offer some other tools in Dharma support. So
okay, so Danes and Canadians, you can see Kristina in her capacity as a psychotherapist. Everyone else, you can study meditation and Dharma with her. You offer the Dharma instruction, meditation instruction on a Dana basis, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Kristina, any final things that you want to say before we close and say goodnight?
just to say it's been a lot of fun and enjoyable
Yeah.
to chat with some of you and to chat with you, John. And thank you for the invitation. And happy
Expect
that
to get
a
another
group like
one.
this exists. Yes. Okay.
I hope you'll
Sounds
join
good.
us again sometime.
Sure.
Thank you, Kristina. And everybody, thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for your practice. Grateful to every single one of you. You make this group what it is. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. Bye.